wanted to be a famous drummer. I assumed I was going to be married. I had names for the kids I was going to have. I had it all planned out, but I had never asked God what he wanted. I knew that I had to trust God. So I actually stopped and I prayed. And I said, Lord, I do not want to be a priest. It seemed like he slowly implanted that desire to be a priest within me, so that what was my worst nightmare at the beginning eventually became a dream and something I desired. So he was attracting me to it. My name is Father Hyacinth Cordell. I'm originally from suburban Chicago. My parents still live out there, and my brother lives not too far from my parents with his wife and their 2 kids. And I grew up Catholic, going to church pretty much every Sunday. But there was, I would say, a certain amount lacking in our faith as well. We weren't necessarily devout. And I would say that we were living in a very secular world. In my life as a child, I was interested in lots of things, typical things, sports, and influenced by my father. I started music. I joined the band. Played percussion, and then I basically played drums and percussion through the rest of elementary, middle, high school, and even went to college at the University of North Texas, which has a big music school, studying music, playing music, and getting more and more into it with time. When I was about 15 or 16, I had a cousin who was the same age as I was who died suddenly, and it was very shocking. I, of course, always knew that we're going to die someday, but it never really hit me that powerfully up until that moment. And so when Paul died, I was wondering, well, where is he now? And what happens after death? So I remember asking an uncle on my other side of the family, well, where is Paul now? And he said something like, well, hopefully he's with the Lord. And I thought, well, I hope that's the case, and that would be great, but is it true? And after that, I really started thinking a lot about these big existential questions. What happens after death? What's the whole point of life? And does God exist? What about different religions? And it seemed like nothing mattered until I found the answer to these questions. So I would think a lot. I would do my own version of praying. I really didn't know how to pray that much or on my own. But I began thinking a lot about these questions. Now, in the meantime, I had been getting more and more into music, and I started checking out books on music. So books about different artists and groups that I was interested in. And then I discovered books on 20th century composers doing all these wild and crazy things that I thought were really interesting. As I was reading about music and going to the library more often then, I remember on the side, I'm still having all these questions about life in general and the point of life and death. Well, there was one time that I was walking past the religious section in the library, and a book sort of caught my attention out of the corner of my eye, and I looked over, and picked it up and I started thumbing through it, and I saw that it was about all the major religions of the world. And I thought, this is great. This is just what I've been looking for. And so when I started reading through all the different religions, it was very interesting to me, and I found a lot of good and inspiring things. I also saw some things that just didn't seem right. So I just figured at the time that there would probably be no place where I could find all truth in one place. So I figured that I would probably just glean insights or truth from this, from different places and kind of pull them together in my own kind of way. And then after that, I started reading more about individual religions. And I started reading about Gandhi as well. And he very much interested me because he seemed like he lived a very inspiring, authentic life. Even though Gandhi never accepted Jesus as the only Son of God, as God who incarnate, yet he was fascinated by the figure of Christ and was more inspired by him than anyone else. Even as I was questioning things, kind of moving away from my faith in various ways, I felt like Gandhi was almost pointing me back to reconsider my roots and to look back at Christianity. Another thing that happened was that I was confirmed in high school. In our parish, we were confirmed much later than most places, at 11th grade, so as juniors in high school. I wasn't yet quite convinced that the Catholic faith was the faith that I wanted to dedicate my life to and the truth. I was intrigued by certain things as I was reading things, but I also had my hesitations. So I wasn't sure if I wanted to go forth with confirmation. So my dad arranged, with all these questions, a meeting that I had with a local priest. And so we sat down, the priest, my father and I. I was able to ask any questions that I wanted, and the priest listened very well, and he responded well. And I don't even think I was able to fully understand all the questions he offered me, and he could pick up on that. And so he basically said, well, with all of this, it's going to take time for you to understand all of these things. For now, he said, probably the most important question for you to answer is, do you feel that God is working through the Catholic Church? If so, then you have reason to go forward and be confirmed. If not, then not. And I thought, yeah, I think he is. So I decided to go ahead and get confirmed, even though there was a lot I still didn't know. And there's a lot of questions I still had. Part of confirmation, of course, is finding a confirmation sponsor. And this was explained to me, and so I wasn't really sure who I should ask to be my sponsor. But then I remembered in 9th grade, I had a very interesting teacher. His name was Bob Esposito. He would talk about things that a lot of other people wouldn't. He would talk about heaven and hell, and you could tell he just was a good man who was very sincere about his faith. Now, I also happened to be one of the goofballs in the class. So when I was in 11th grade and went back to Bob, who was my 9th grade teacher, I think he was very surprised that I asked him to be my confirmation sponsor in light of all of that. But he said yes, thankfully. And after that, I started getting together with him. He was a young husband and father, so I got to know he and his family. And I would go over to his place and ask him a lot of questions that I had. And he would do his best to answer, and if he didn't know the answer, he would try to look up the answer and try to get back with me. And then he started lending me tapes. This is back on the days of cassette tapes. There was one time that we were on a family vacation, and it was on a long drive, and kind of ran out of things to do. I remember that Bob gave me this set of tapes. Basically, it was a book, Crossing the Threshold of Hope by John Paul II. And the interviewer asks the Pope a lot of very fundamental and modern questions, like, does God exist? If he exists, why is he hiding? What about the different religions? And so on. And these were a lot of the questions I was wrestling with. So I told my parents since there was nothing else to do, long car ride, perhaps you can just put these tapes in and we can start to listen to these. They're like, okay. So they did. And when I started listening to them, I was blown away because the interviewer was asking all these questions that I was wondering about. And all the answers that the Pope gave were very profound and deep and really well thought out. Everything he said rang true. And it was the first time for me where everything seemed to come together. And I couldn't really argue against any of his points. So there was a harmony to it all. So that was a pivotal moment for me to consider the Catholic faith as a whole, as this beautiful whole where everything kind of fits together for the first time. So that got my attention and made an impression on me. Another key moment, and this ties into my vocation story or feeling called to the priesthood, is so one of the tapes that Bob lent me was Kimberly Hahn's conversion tape. And as I was listening to that, she was explaining how she slowly came to become Catholic. During that part of the story, she asked a number of rhetorical questions. And one of the questions she asked was, can God be trusted with my life? I had never thought of that question before. And it was put so succinctly and powerfully. So when she asked that, the tape kept on going, but I froze. It occurred to me that up until that point, even though I was a teenager living with my parents in a certain culture and condition, still I was kind of living the way I wanted to live, and I had plans for the rest of my life. I wanted to be a famous drummer. I assumed I was going to be married. I had names for the kids I was going to have. I had it all planned out, but I had never asked God what he wanted. But it was obvious to me that, well, if God exists, and that means he's infinitely wise, he's infinite goodness, infinite truth, infinite beauty, infinite love. Of course he can be trusted with our lives. He could be trusted with our lives much more than we can trust ourselves with our lives. Now at the same time, the thought of the priesthood came into my mind. I don't know from where. I really knew almost nothing about the priesthood, but it didn't take a rocket scientist to put these two things together. Could God be trusted with my life, even if he called me to be a priest? That was scary to me, but I knew that I had to trust God. So I actually stopped and I prayed, and I said, Lord, I do not want to be a priest. But if you want me to be one, I'll do it. I trust you. That was not easy for me to say. But once I said that and prayed that, what happened afterwards, I didn't see anything, I didn't hear anything, but that was sort of a beginning moment where I started to open up my heart and trying to be open to and actually actively seek what God wants for my life and to try to trust that, even though that was difficult. So after that moment, I began praying more and more, Lord, what do you want of my life? Do you want me to be married? Do you want me to be a priest? And then slowly through time, over the next few months, it seemed like he slowly implanted that desire to be a priest within me, so that what was my worst nightmare at the beginning eventually became a dream and something I desired. So he was attracting me to it. I still wasn't sure what to do after all of this, so all this is happening and developing, but I'm also increasingly being interested in music and drums. So I decided to go to college, and just to pursue that, I figured I had this musical talent, might as well try to develop that more and see where that leads. So that was a good year. I went to the University of North Texas for a year. I played in their drum line. We got to go to Nashville. We won the national championship that year in 1996. Also played in a jazz guitar ensemble. Was learning a lot about music, so it was a good experience. But it was also a very, very secular environment. There was really no one else who was on the same page as I was in that journey of faith. At a certain point, I decided to kind of leave all that behind. To make a long story short, I wound up joining, after moving back home, I wound up joining a religious community outside of St. Louis, which I was in for a few years. And I entered at the age of 19, and we lived in hermitages in the woods, but we also did door-to-door evangelization in the inner city of St. Louis. And that was also very good for me, to live a kind of very radical life like that. We spent a lot of time in solitary prayer and reading and studying and work, in and around in our woodsy area. There was the door-to-door evangelization. So I really needed that because I needed to grow up and mature in many ways. And that really taught me a lot of discipline in terms of life. So that was very good for me. At a certain point, I no longer felt called there, though. I felt like it wasn't the best match, even though it was good for me. So after a lot of prayer and discussion, decided to leave at the right time. Still felt called to the priesthood. And towards the end of my time there, a Dominican actually came and gave us a retreat. And I talked with him about my vocation. He encouraged me to think about the Dominicans, so I said, okay, I will. I started reading more about St. Dominic and the Dominicans after that. I kept in touch with the Dominicans the whole time, went on a vocation weekend, and then applied, and then entered. And every step of the way, I've just felt like I finally was where God was calling me. It was finally this way of life fit. So I entered in 2004 and then took vows in final vows in 2008, was ordained a priest in 2011. I was a parochial vicar or assistant pastor after my ordination up at St. Pius V Parish in Providence, Rhode Island for 4 years. And then my second assignment was down in DC. I was at a parish there for 5 years, 3 years as vicar, 2 years as pastor. Then I was asked to come to Philadelphia, and so that's what brought me here. So I've been here in Philadelphia as the pastor and superior of the community for a little over 3 years now. I really enjoy being here. It's a really unique place and unique opportunity to evangelize. So people are often surprised when they learn that I play drums. People don't expect to see somebody in a medieval habit and a priest playing drums. And we drummers are really fascinated by the whole realm of rhythm. There are all these rhythms in the universe. The ocean currents on our certain rhythm. And you have rhythms in bird calls. You have rhythms in the revolution of the planets. So we take these rhythms that are in nature and we begin to fashion them into rhythmic music. And there's a whole world of possibility there that we drummers like to explore with different sounds in a way that lifts people up, that inspires them to dance, and hopefully points them ultimately to the mystery of God. When I look back over my life, either the recent past or looking back over a number of years, you can see how things came together in kind of a remarkable way. I wouldn't have been able to tell at the time, but when I look back, and it's pretty remarkable how that happened, meeting certain people just at the right time. And sometimes the chances are so little something like that would happen. Those are things through which the Lord has touched my life. But then there are also those moments where sometimes you're just in the right time and right place, to meet somebody else, to be of assistance to them. And you could have never orchestrated that on your own. And you look back, though, and you can see somehow God worked through you and put you in that time and place just for that occasion or for that person. And it's humbling to realize that God used you in that way. One of the things that our Archbishop says here often to priests is how God works through us, with us, and despite us. And all of us resonate to that. I think in a similar way that parents with their children, they put a lot of time into their children, and yet they also feel inadequate in a lot of ways. Well, we priests feel the same way, that we thank God for the different ways He's working through us, but we all feel that we fall far short of the great vocation and gift of the priesthood that He's given us to be shepherds in the image of Christ, and we all fall short of that. And so we thank God that He still works through us despite us. It's humbling. It's also inspiring to see how, though God continually works to help people through us and even despite us. So I would encourage everybody to be open and not to be afraid. God can be trusted with your life, and He is calling you to something. If you're open and you're seeking His will, then I think it's good to expose yourself to good examples of different vocations, to make sure you meet some really good examples of Catholic couples, married couples, and families that are living out their vocation really well. And then perhaps if you feel drawn or open to visit different religious communities, if you're a man, perhaps look at the diocese and get to know some really good diocesan priests. And after a while, I think you would naturally be drawn more to one over another. And then there are stages that you go through that will either confirm that or perhaps might gear you towards another path to give you greater clarity in another direction. And so it is a great adventure. It's not always easy, but in whatever path that God is choosing for you, He's calling you closer and closer to Himself and wants to use you through your own unique gifts and personhood and personality to give glory to Him and to work through others, to draw others to Him, and for your own fulfillment as well.
Lord and Giver of life, raise up men filled with Your power and with great missionary zeal, so that all who dwell in darkness may come to live in the light of Christ. Amen.